The golden chandeliers cast warm light across the magnificent hall as Lady Catherine adjusted her sapphire necklace one final time. The grand Guildhall had been transformed into something beyond imagination for tonight's celebration. Hundreds of candles flickered in ornate holders, their flames dancing across the polished marble floors and reflecting off the crystal glasses that adorned each perfectly set table. Lady Catherine, wife of the Duke of Westmere, had spent weeks planning this evening's banquet. As one of the most respected members of the royal household, she understood the importance of every detail. Tonight was not just any celebration. It marked the 25th anniversary of the kingdom's peace treaty with neighboring lands, and representatives from across the realm would gather to commemorate this historic milestone. Beside her stood Duchess Eleanor of Ravenshallow, a woman whose grace and wisdom had earned her the admiration of nobles and common folk alike. Eleanor's emerald gown complemented her striking features, and her warm smile could light up any room. The two women had become close friends over their years of service to the crown, supporting each other through the challenges and joys of royal life. The massive oak doors of the Guildhall stood ready to welcome guests. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, making final adjustments to the elaborate table settings. Each place setting featured the finest china, imported from the eastern provinces, decorated with intricate patterns of roses and gold leaf. Crystal goblets caught the light like captured stars, while silver cutlery gleamed against crisp white linens. The evening's menu had been carefully crafted by the royal kitchen staff. The head chef, Master William, had worked tirelessly to create dishes that would honor both tradition and innovation. Roasted peacock with herb stuffing would serve as the centerpiece, accompanied by honey-glazed vegetables from the royal gardens. The finest wines from the kingdom's southern vineyards had been selected to complement each course. Lady Catherine walked slowly through the hall, inspecting every detail with the practiced eye of someone who had overseen countless royal events. The floral arrangements caught her attention, magnificent displays of white lilies and red roses, symbols of the unity between the two formerly warring nations. Each arrangement had been positioned to create an atmosphere of elegance and celebration, while allowing guests to converse easily across the tables. Musicians tuned their instruments in the gallery above. The royal orchestra would provide entertainment throughout the evening, playing both classical pieces and folk melodies that celebrated the cultural heritage of all the kingdom's regions. The acoustic design of the Guildhall would carry their music perfectly to every corner of the vast space. Duchess Eleanor approached her friend, admiring the transformation of the familiar hall. "Catherine, you have outdone yourself once again," she said with genuine appreciation. "This evening will be remembered for years to come." The two women had worked together on many such occasions, but tonight felt special. The peace treaty being celebrated had personal meaning for both of them. Lady Catherine's own brother had served as a diplomat during the negotiations, while Duchess Eleanor's late husband had been instrumental in brokering the initial ceasefire that led to lasting peace. As the hour approached for guests to arrive, the final preparations intensified. Footmen took their positions by the entrance, ready to announce each guest and assist with cloaks and wraps. The evening promised to be cool, with autumn winds beginning to stir outside the great building. The kitchen staff made their final preparations, ensuring that each dish would be served at the perfect temperature and presentation. Master William had trained his team extensively for this evening, and they moved with military precision. The first course, a delicate soup made from seasonal vegetables and herbs, was already prepared and waiting. Lady Catherine reviewed the guest list one more time. Representatives from every major noble house would attend, along with distinguished visitors from allied kingdoms. Each guest had been carefully seated to promote interesting conversation while respecting the complex web of royal protocol and diplomatic considerations. The floral perfume from hundreds of arrangements filled the air, mixing with the aroma of beeswax candles and the subtle scent of fine wood polish on the ancient oak furnishings. Every sense would be delighted by the carefully orchestrated environment. Duchess Eleanor checked her appearance in one of the ornate mirrors that lined the walls. Her reflection showed a woman of dignity and grace, someone who had earned her position through years of dedicated service and natural leadership abilities. Tonight, she would represent not just her own noble house, but the values of compassion and wisdom that the kingdom cherished. The servants completed their final tasks, ensuring that everything met the exacting standards expected for a royal banquet. Each had been selected for their skill and discretion, understanding that tonight's success depended on seamless service that would remain virtually invisible to the guests. As Lady Catherine and Duchess Elinor took their final walk through the hall, they felt a sense of pride and anticipation. The months of planning, the attention to countless details, and the coordination of dozens of staff members had all led to this moment. The transformation of the Guildhall into a palace of celebration was complete. The sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones outside announced the arrival of the first guests. Lady Catherine and Duchess Elinor exchanged a look of excitement and satisfaction. Their grand banquet was about to begin, promising an evening that would strengthen bonds of friendship, celebrate hard-won peace, and create memories that would last a lifetime. The golden glow of candlelight reflected off polished surfaces throughout the hall, creating an atmosphere of warmth and magnificence. Every element had been perfectly arranged to ensure that this celebration would honor both the past achievements and future hopes of the kingdom. Tonight, the Guildhall would witness history in the making, as leaders gathered to reaffirm their commitment to peace and prosperity for all their people. The great bronze doors swung open with ceremonial precision, revealing the first wave of distinguished guests. Lady Catherine and Duchess Elinor positioned themselves in the reception line, their practiced smiles reflecting genuine warmth and anticipation. The evening's grandest moment had arrived, and both women felt the electric excitement that always accompanied such significant royal gatherings. Lord Ambassador Harrison entered first, representing the Eastern kingdoms that had once stood at the brink of war with their realm. His deep blue diplomatic robes were adorned with the silver threads that marked his high office, and his presence carried the weight of historic reconciliation. Behind him walked Lady Margaret of Thornfield, whose family had lost much during the conflicts but had chosen forgiveness over revenge. The orchestra above began playing a gentle processional melody, their music weaving through conversations and creating an atmosphere of sophisticated celebration. Each note seemed perfectly timed to complement the rustle of silk gowns and the soft footsteps of guests moving across the polished marble floors. Duchess Elinor greeted each arrival with personal warmth, remembering details about their families, their recent achievements, and their particular interests. Her ability to make every person feel genuinely welcomed had made her legendary throughout the kingdom. She inquired about Lord Harrison's daughter, who had recently married, and complimented Lady Margaret on her charitable work with war orphans. The guest list represented a remarkable cross-section of the kingdom's leadership and their international allies. Military commanders who had once faced each other across battlefields now entered as honored friends. Merchants whose trade routes had been disrupted by years of conflict arrived knowing that prosperity had returned to benefit all. Scholars and artists, whose work had been supported by the peace dividend, brought with them stories of cultural renaissance. Lady Catherine observed with satisfaction as guests moved naturally into conversation groups. The careful seating arrangement she had planned encouraging exactly the kind of meaningful interaction she had envisioned. The younger nobles mixed easily with seasoned diplomats, while military veterans shared stories with the merchant princes who had helped rebuild the economy. Master William's staff began circulating with silver trays bearing delicate appetizers and perfectly chilled wine. Each server moved with practiced grace, ensuring that every guest had immediate access to refreshment while remaining virtually invisible. The coordination required for serving hundreds of distinguished guests simultaneously was a masterpiece of planning and execution. The conversation gradually grew more animated as old friends reconnected and new acquaintances discovered common interests. Laughter began to punctuate the steady hum of diplomatic discourse, creating exactly the atmosphere of celebratory camaraderie that the evening was meant to foster. Near the center of the hall, a group gathered around General Victor Ashworth, the military leader whose strategic brilliance had ultimately made peace possible. Rather than dwelling on past conflicts, he spoke passionately about the infrastructure projects that former soldiers were now building together. Roads, bridges, and schools were rising where battlefields had once scarred the landscape. Duchess Elinor found herself drawn into a fascinating conversation with Ambassador Isabella Chen, whose kingdom had remained neutral during the conflicts, but had provided crucial mediation services. Isabella's insights into the delicate negotiations that had produced the peace treaty offered perspective that few others could provide. The younger generation of nobles particularly impressed Lady Catherine with their enthusiasm for the peace and their creative ideas for strengthening international cooperation. Lady Anne Pemberton discussed her plans to establish student exchange programs between former enemy kingdoms. Lord James Fletcher outlined his vision for joint artistic festivals that would celebrate the cultural diversity of their allied nations. As more guests continued to arrive, the Great Hall filled with the energy of celebration and renewal. The candlelight seemed to grow warmer and more welcoming, while the floral arrangements released their subtle perfumes into the increasingly lively atmosphere. Every detail of the environment contributed to a sense of luxury and significance. The musicians transitioned to livelier melodies, encouraging guests to move more freely about the hall and engage in the kind of animated discussions that would strengthen both personal relationships and diplomatic ties. The acoustic properties of the ancient building carried conversations and laughter throughout the space without creating cacophony. Lady Catherine noticed with particular pleasure how naturally the guests were forming mixed groups that crossed old political boundaries. Former adversaries found themselves sharing wine and discovering mutual interests in art, literature, and commerce. Young people especially seemed to embrace the possibilities that peace had created for their generation. The elaborate table settings awaited the formal dinner service, but for now, guests enjoyed the opportunity to move freely and engage in the kind of informal diplomacy that often proved more effective than formal negotiations. Treaties could be signed by governments, but lasting peace required personal relationships and mutual understanding. Duchess Eleanor's attention was captured by a group of ladies discussing plans for charitable foundations that would operate across national boundaries. The war had created many needs that peacetime cooperation could address more effectively than any individual kingdom could manage alone. Their enthusiasm for collaborative philanthropy represented exactly the spirit of partnership that the peace treaty was meant to encourage. The serving staff continued their seamless work, ensuring that wine glasses remained full and that the carefully prepared appetizers reached every guest. Their professional excellence reflected the care that had gone into every aspect of the evening's preparation. As the reception hour progressed, Lady Catherine and Duchess Eleanor moved gracefully through the crowd, ensuring that every guest felt personally welcomed while observing the natural dynamics of conversation and connection that were developing. The success of any royal gathering could be measured not just by its elegance and organization, but by the genuine human connections it fostered. The great Guildhall had become a living symbol of transformation, its ancient stones witnessing the creation of new friendships and the strengthening of old ones. The building itself seemed to embrace the celebration, its historic walls reflecting the voices of those who now gathered in peace rather than preparing for war. The evening's formal programming would soon begin, but these precious moments of informal interaction were already creating the foundation for relationships that would extend far beyond tonight's celebration. Lady Catherine and Duchess Eleanor exchanged satisfied glances, knowing that their careful planning was bearing fruit in ways that exceeded even their ambitious hopes for the evening. The melodious chime of silver bells announced that dinner service would begin, and guests began moving gracefully toward their assigned seats. Lady Catherine felt a surge of pride as she watched the seamless transition from reception to formal dining. Every guest found their place card written in elegant calligraphy, positioned at table settings that represented months of careful diplomatic consideration. The royal protocol officer announced the evening's honored guests, his trained voice carrying clearly throughout the vast hall. Each introduction was met with warm applause, celebrating individuals whose contributions to peace and prosperity had earned them recognition from across the allied kingdoms. Duchess Eleanor took her place at the head table, positioned where she could observe the entire gathering while engaging in conversation with the evening's most distinguished visitors. To her right sat Archbishop Benedict, whose moral leadership had helped heal the spiritual wounds left by years of conflict. To her left, Minister of Commerce Lady Victoria Hartwell discussed the remarkable economic recovery that peaceful trade had made possible. Master William's culinary masterpiece began with a delicate butternut squash soup, garnished with toasted seeds and served in bowls that had been warmed to perfection. The rich, creamy texture and subtle spice blend immediately drew compliments from guests throughout the hall. Each spoonful represented hours of preparation and the finest ingredients available in the kingdom. The conversation at each table flowed as smoothly as the wine being served by attentive staff members. Lady Catherine observed with satisfaction that her seating arrangements were working exactly as intended. Former military opponents found themselves discussing agricultural innovations, while merchants and nobles discovered shared interests in supporting the arts. The second course arrived with theatrical flourish, roasted game birds presented on silver platters and carved tableside by skilled servants. The meat was tender and flavorful, accompanied by seasonal vegetables that had been cultivated in the royal gardens specifically for tonight's celebration. The presentation was as magnificent as the taste, with each plate arranged like a work of art. At one table, young Lord Timothy Blackwood entertained his dinner companions with stories of his recent journey to the southern provinces, where he had established new trade routes that benefited farmers in both formerly hostile regions. His enthusiasm for commerce as a tool of peace-building reflected the forward-thinking attitude of his generation. Duchess Elena found herself engaged in a particularly meaningful conversation with Lady Maria Santos, whose family had fled the borderlands during the worst years of conflict. Maria's recent return to establish schools for children whose education had been disrupted by war demonstrated the kind of healing that made peace more than just the absence of fighting. The wine service showcased selections from vineyards throughout the Allied territories, each vintage chosen to complement specific courses while also representing the diverse agricultural heritage of their United Kingdoms. The royal sommelier had trained for years to develop the expertise necessary for such an ambitious presentation. Lady Catherine noticed how the golden candlelight seemed to enhance the natural beauty of every guest, while the soft background music created an atmosphere that encouraged both intimate conversation and larger group discussions. The ancient Guildhall had been transformed into a palace worthy of the most sophisticated royal court. The third course featured fresh seafood from the coastal provinces, prepared with herbs and spices that reflected the international character of their expanded trade relationships. Delicate fish had been paired with wine reductions that brought out complex flavors while demonstrating the culinary artistry that peaceful prosperity made possible. Throughout the hall, laughter and animated discussion created exactly the atmosphere of celebration that the evening was meant to achieve. Former enemies shared toasts to friendship, while new alliances were discussed over shared appreciation for fine food and wine. The personal connections being forged tonight would strengthen diplomatic relationships for years to come. The children of noble families, seated at their own specially arranged table, were learning firsthand about the benefits of international cooperation and peaceful resolution of conflicts. Their presence represented hope for a future where war would be remembered only in history books, not personal experience. Master William appeared briefly to receive the acclaim his culinary artistry deserved, accepting compliments from guests who understood that tonight's menu represented far more than mere sustenance. Each dish had been chosen to celebrate the abundance that peace had brought to their lands, using ingredients that trade agreements had made available from across the known world. The royal musicians transitioned to more complex compositions that showcased the cultural heritage of all the Allied kingdoms. The melodies wove together traditional themes from different regions, creating new harmonies that symbolized the unity that had emerged from their shared commitment to peace. Duchess Elena raised her crystal goblet in a toast that was echoed throughout the hall. To the wisdom that chose peace over victory, and to the courage that builds bridges where walls once stood, she proclaimed, her words carrying to every corner of the great room. The responding cheer reflected genuine emotion from guests who had lived through both war and its aftermath. The serving staff continued their impeccable service, ensuring that every guest's needs were anticipated and met before they could even be expressed. Their professional excellence reflected the pride that all citizens took in their kingdom's newfound prosperity and international reputation for hospitality. As the main course concluded, guests settled into more relaxed conversation, their formal diplomatic demeanor giving way to genuine friendship and shared appreciation for the remarkable evening they were experiencing. The success of the banquet was evident not just in the elegance of its presentation, but in the authentic human connections it was fostering. Lady Catherine moved discreetly through the hall, ensuring that every aspect of service met her exacting standards, while observing with deep satisfaction the natural flow of interaction between guests. Tonight's gathering was achieving everything she had hoped for when planning began months earlier. The transformation of the Guildhall into this magnificent venue for celebration represented countless hours of preparation. But more importantly, it symbolized the transformation of their entire region from a battleground into a showcase of cooperative prosperity. Every detail of the evening reflected that remarkable journey from conflict to collaboration. The evening's most anticipated moment arrived as Master William's staff began presenting the dessert course, an elaborate creation that had required days of preparation and represented the pinnacle of culinary artistry. The centerpiece was a magnificent sugar sculpture depicting the Tree of Peace, surrounded by delicate pastries filled with exotic fruits and creams that had been imported from the farthest reaches of their trading partners. Lady Catherine watched with deep satisfaction as guests exclaimed over the beauty and ingenuity of the sweet course. Each table received its own smaller version of the sugar artistry, ensuring that every person could appreciate both the visual spectacle and the extraordinary flavors that Master William had crafted for this special occasion. The conversation throughout the hall had evolved from formal diplomatic discourse to genuine personal exchanges. Duchess Elena found herself deeply moved by the stories being shared at her table, tales of families reunited, communities rebuilt, and dreams restored that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of conflict. Lord Commander Richards, whose military strategies had ultimately secured victory, now spoke passionately about the veterans' settlement programs that were transforming former battlefields into productive farmland. His weathered hands gestured expressively as he described how men who had once fought against each other now worked side by side to build homes and plant crops. The Royal Orchestra had expanded their repertoire to include requests from guests, creating a truly interactive musical experience that reflected the collaborative spirit of the evening. When Lady Anne suggested a melody from her childhood, the musicians seamlessly incorporated it into their performance, drawing smiles and even gentle singing from guests who recognized the familiar tune. The wine service reached its crescendo with rare dessert wines that had been aging in royal cellars for decades, saved specifically for occasions of historic significance. The golden liquid caught the candlelight in crystal goblets, creating small prisms of light that danced across the white linen tablecloths. Young diplomats at one table were already making plans for cultural exchange programs that would bring artists, scholars, and craftsmen together from all the allied kingdoms. Their enthusiasm for building lasting connections through shared creativity and learning represented exactly the kind of long-term thinking that would ensure peace endured beyond the current generation. The serving staff began offering coffee and tea from exotic regions, accompanied by delicate chocolates and petit fours that provided perfect endings to individual conversations while encouraging guests to linger and continue their discussions. The careful packing of service allowed natural breaks for reflection and deeper connection. Duchess Elena rose from her seat to address the gathering, her graceful movement drawing attention throughout the hall. The conversations gradually quieted as guests turned toward her, anticipating words that would capture the significance of this extraordinary evening. "Distinguished friends and honored allies," she began, her clear voice carrying easily to every corner of the great room. "Tonight we celebrate not just a treaty signed 25 years ago, but the living proof that former enemies can become cherished friends. Look around this hall and see the faces of those who chose wisdom over warfare, prosperity over plunder, and hope over hatred." The assembled guests listened with rapt attention as she continued. "Each of you represents communities that were touched by conflict but refused to be defined by it. The children growing up in our lands today will know peace not as the absence of war, but as the presence of justice, cooperation, and mutual respect." Her words resonated deeply with guests who had lived through both the trauma of conflict and the joy of reconstruction. Many nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears of remembrance for those who had not lived to see this day of celebration. "The Guildhall has witnessed many historic moments," Duchess Elena continued, "but tonight it bears witness to something unprecedented: the transformation of a continent from a collection of warring states into a community of allied peoples committed to shared prosperity and mutual defense." The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, reflecting genuine appreciation not just for her words, but for the leadership she had provided during the difficult years of rebuilding. Her personal sacrifices and tireless work for reconciliation had earned her respect across all political boundaries. Lady Catherine felt tears of pride and accomplishment as she observed the reaction to her friend's speech. The evening had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations, creating exactly the atmosphere of celebration and commitment that such a historic anniversary deserved. As Duchess Elena returned to her seat, conversations resumed with renewed energy and purpose. The formal portion of the evening was drawing to a close, but the connections being formed would extend far beyond tonight's celebration. Business partnerships, cultural exchanges, and personal friendships were being established that would strengthen the bonds between their allied nations. The musicians began playing softer melodies that encouraged guests to move freely about the hall once again, visiting different tables and continuing conversations that had been started during dinner. The candlelight seemed even warmer now, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the grand scale of the gathering. Master William made a final appearance to present a special gift to the honored hosts, an illuminated cookbook containing the recipes for tonight's feast, bound in leather and decorated with gold leaf. The gesture represented his commitment to preserving the memory of this evening through the sensory experiences that had made it so memorable. The success of the banquet was evident in every face throughout the hall. Diplomats who had arrived with formal agendas were now engaged in personal conversations about their families and private interests. Military leaders shared stories of peacetime achievements rather than wartime victories. Artists and scholars found new patrons and collaborators among the assembled nobility. As the evening continued, Lady Catherine and Duchess Elena moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations and expressing their own gratitude for the participation that had made tonight such a remarkable success. Every guest had contributed to creating an atmosphere that truly honored the spirit of peace and cooperation they had gathered to celebrate. The transformation of the Great Hall from a formal dining venue into an intimate space for continued conversation reflected the broader transformation of their region from a place of conflict into a center of cooperation and prosperity. The evening's crescendo arrived as the great clock tower chimed midnight, but the energy within the Guildhall showed no signs of diminishing. Lady Catherine and Duchess Elena exchanged knowing glances, recognizing that their carefully planned celebration had evolved into something even more meaningful than they had dared hope. A genuine community gathering where former strangers had become friends and old friends had deepened their bonds. The younger guests had formed an impromptu musical ensemble, combining their voices in harmonies that blended folk songs from different kingdoms into new melodies that seemed to represent their shared future. Their spontaneous performance drew appreciative listeners from throughout the hall, creating circles of connection that transcended the formal seating arrangements. Master William's staff had discreetly cleared the dining tables, transforming the space to accommodate the natural flow of conversation groups that had formed throughout the evening. The great hall now resembled an elegant salon where ideas and friendships were being exchanged with equal enthusiasm. Duchess Elena found herself in deep conversation with a group of educators who were planning the first inter-kingdom university, where students from all allied nations would study together and develop the shared understanding that would ensure peace endured for generations to come. Their vision of scholarship without borders represented exactly the kind of transformative thinking that true peace made possible. The floral arrangements had released their fragrance throughout the long evening, creating a garden-like atmosphere that enhanced the sense of natural beauty and abundance that characterized their peacetime prosperity. The candles had burned lower, but continued to provide warm, intimate lighting that encouraged honest conversation and genuine connection. Lady Catherine observed with deep satisfaction how naturally the evening's formality had given way to authentic human interaction. Protocol and precedence had been important for establishing the proper tone, but the true success of the gathering lay in the personal relationships that were being forged between individuals who would shape the future of their allied kingdoms. The wine service had evolved into a more casual offering that allowed guests to sample rare vintages while continuing their discussions. The royal sommelier had become something of a celebrity himself, sharing stories about the vineyards and vintners whose work was represented in tonight's exceptional collection. A group of military veterans had gathered near the great fireplace, sharing not war stories but tales of the reconstruction projects that had given new purpose to their skills and energy. Former cavalry officers described building schools, while engineers who had once designed fortifications now created hospitals and bridges that served peaceful communities. The musicians had been joined by several guests who were accomplished performers in their own right, creating a collaborative musical experience that reflected the cooperative spirit that had defined the entire evening. The impromptu concert drew standing ovations from appreciative listeners who understood that they were witnessing something spontaneous and magical. Young Lord Edmund Fairfax approached Lady Catherine with a proposal that exemplified the forward-thinking attitude that had emerged throughout the evening. He outlined plans for an annual gathering that would rotate between the allied kingdoms, creating ongoing opportunities for the kind of meaningful interaction that tonight had demonstrated to be so valuable. Duchess Eleanor was deeply moved by a presentation from Lady Margaret's charitable foundation, which had used tonight's gathering to announce a major initiative that would provide educational opportunities for children whose families had been disrupted by the long years of conflict. The foundation had already secured commitments from donors throughout the hall who had been inspired by the evening's spirit of generosity. The serving staff continued their exceptional service even as the formal structure of the evening dissolved into spontaneous celebration. Their professionalism and attention to detail had helped create the seamless experience that allowed guests to focus entirely on building relationships and planning collaborative projects. As the night progressed, Lady Catherine realized that tonight's success would be measured not just by the immediate pleasure it provided, but by the lasting impact of the connections being formed. Business partnerships, cultural exchanges, educational collaborations, and personal friendships were all taking root in the fertile ground of shared celebration and mutual respect. The great Guildhall had been transformed multiple times throughout the evening, from elegant reception venue to formal dining hall to intimate salon for ongoing conversation. Each transformation had felt natural and appropriate, reflecting the building's historic role as a gathering place for significant community events. The dessert wines and late evening refreshments provided the perfect accompaniment to conversations that had grown deeper and more meaningful as the night progressed. Guests who had arrived as diplomatic representatives were departing as personal friends, carrying with them memories and commitments that would strengthen their kingdom's relationships for years to come. The success of the evening was evident in the reluctance of guests to bring their conversations to an end. Small groups continued their discussions even as carriages arrived to transport them back to their lodgings, with many making plans to continue their conversations over breakfast or during planned visits to each other's estates. Lady Catherine and Duchess Eleanor stood together in the gradually emptying hall, surveying the scene of their triumph with deep satisfaction and genuine affection for each other. Their months of planning and attention to detail had created something that exceeded mere entertainment. They had facilitated the creation of a community committed to peace and mutual prosperity. The candlelight flickered lower as the last guests made their farewells, but the warmth of the evening's success would continue to glow in memory for years to come. The Guildhall had witnessed many historic events, but tonight it had become the birthplace of friendships and partnerships that would shape the future of their allied kingdoms. As the great doors closed behind the final departing guests, Lady Catherine and Duchess Eleanor knew that their banquet had achieved something remarkable. It had proven that celebration and diplomacy, when combined with genuine hospitality and careful planning, could create lasting bonds between peoples who had once stood divided. Tonight's success would inspire similar gatherings throughout their allied territories, spreading the spirit of cooperation and friendship that made true peace not just possible, but joyful.